We continue now at the top of Daf Pedalet Amud Aleph Meseches Pesachim. This is Pesachim Daf 84a. The Gemara here is bringing various sources as to why you're not allowed to burn the noser. Let's say you have the leftover part of a Korban Pesach, why you can't burn it on Yontiv. The Gemara is in the middle of Rava source. He learns out velo mila shelo bizmana. You can't do mila shelo bizmana, meaning a mila shelo bizmana is not docha Shabbos, is not docha Yontiv. Haba mikal v'chomer. You could have thought it is docha from a kal v'chomer, but we learn out from this pasuk that that is not the case. Rashi over here explains. If you didn't have the exclusion from the pasuk, I actually might have thought that mila shelo bizman is docha. If it comes to tzaras, which is docha avoda, and avoda is docha Shabbos, mila af shelo bizman dochos, and mila can be docha, even shelo bizmana can be docha tzaras. Afilu b'makom baheres yikotz ba'araso. You cut off the baheres in order to perform bismillah. Shabbos shenidachas mibnei avoda. Shabbos, which the avoda can push off Shabbos. Eino din shetehe mila docha. Isn't it true that mila should be docha? You might have thought that. V'yasa kro miyata, and that's why Rava brings this pasuk that he brought in the previous Amud to say no, that's not allowed. Dekevin shelo bismanohi, since it's not the time of the mila kagon gershin eskayer v'katan shenan asaviv v'yavar zman and eshuya l'machar. Since already it's not mila bismana anyway, you might as well push it off to the next day, not violate Shabbos. And now Rashi explains what the proof is to our situation. V'gabe sreifas pasal kachim nami. So the same thing's going to be true when you're burning kachim that are pasal, like nosar kemila shelo bismana. That's no different than mila shelo bismana. De'afshar l'shahuye dami. It's something that you can delay. You don't need to do it now. You can do it the next day, and therefore that's Rava's source. Why again sreifas pasal kachim is not going to be docha Shabbos and Yontiv. Rav Ashi has a different source. Shabbos and the Yontiv asehu. The word Shabbos when it comes to Yontiv is actually an asay, to rest on Yontiv. V'yein asay docha los asay v'asay. So now violating Yontiv is going to be a los asay and an asay, and the asay of taking care of the nosar is not going to push off a los asay and the asay, and that's why you have to wait till the next morning, till after Shabbos, till after Yontiv, in order to burn the nosar. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Kol hanechol b'shor hagadol, any part of the animal that in theory, if you would have a large ox, that part of the animal would be edible. So yochal b'gdi harach. So then when you have the soft gedi, the soft goat, you can also appoint people over that part of the animal. That's considered part of the edible part of the Korban Pesach. The Roshei Knafayim v'hasachusim. And that applies also, the Roshei Knafayim are the area of the ribs. Sachusim is the cartilage. The Mishnah seems to be saying that that is considered to be an edible part. Rashi over here says, Kol hanechol b'shor hagadol shekvar huksha kol ma she'atz l'hakshas bo. The point here is, by a shor hagadol, it's a fully grown animal, and so then everything hardens as much as possible. So that's how you test whether something is edible. If it's edible b'shor hagadol, then that part of the body is going to be considered edible in terms of Hilchas Korban Pesach. And if someone is appointed over the group, you have a group of people who are eating this Korban Pesach, and if we designate that particular part for this particular person, that's going to count. That's going to be considered edible. Yochal b'gdi harach roi la'achila b'pesach ben shmona yamim. If you have, let's say, a Korban Pesach, it's 8 days old, that's considered roi la'achila. But if you have a part of the animal that if it would be a shor hagadol, if it would be a large ox, it would not be edible, ein nimnin olav Pesach. You can't start appointing people over that part of the animal and say, that's yours in terms of Korban Pesach. Even though right now that part of the animal might be soft and might be edible, asid lahakshos besofo, in the end it is going to harden, and so that's not considered an edible part of the Korban Pesach. So the Gemara says, Rabba Rami. Rabba has the following contradiction. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, Kol hanechol b'shor hagadol yochel b'gdi harach, v'sheino nechol lo. So the implication is anything which is eaten in the shor hagadol, that's okay, that's considered edible b'gdi harach. But if it's apparently not edible in the shor hagadol, it's not considered edible. It's not considered a part of the Korban Pesach that people can be eating. So emos seifa. So let's look at the end of this, the very same Mishnah. Roshei knafayim v'sachusim. Again, that refers to this area of the ribs and the cartilage. V'hani lo mesachli b'shor hagadol. And Rabbi asks very simply, we know that these parts of the animal are not edible by a shor hagadol, so why does the Mishnah end off and seems to say that these are considered edible parts of the Korban Pesach? So the Gemara says, Ela Tanai, rather, It really is a machlokas hanoim, v'hachi katani, and here's the proper way to read the Mishnah. Kol hanechol b'shor hagadol ye'ochel b'gdi harach v'she'eno nechol lo. First part of the Mishnah says it has to be edible by a shor hagadol, then it's considered to be edible by the gdi harach, otherwise not. V'yesh omer, but some argue, af rashi kanafayim v'sachusim, know that even when it comes to the area of the ribs and the area of the cartilage, even that is going to be considered okay, even though it's not edible by the shor hagadol. Rava Amar Mahin Katani. Rava's different answer. He says the way you read the Mishnah is Mahin. It's giving you specifics. V'hachi Katani. Here's how you should read the Mishnah. Kol hanechol b'shor hagadol b'shilka. If it can be eaten when it's boiled by the shor hagadol, so then yochal b'gdi harach b'tzli. Then it's considered to be edible when it comes to the gdi harach when you're roasting it. Umahin, and what is an example of that? Rashi knafayim v'asachusim. So according to this, the reason why it's considered edible b'shor hagadol, this area of the ribs, the cartilage, is because it's edible when you boil it. So if it's edible when you boil it, that's going to be good enough. And the Gemara here continues. Tanya kavase de Rava. We have a brisa that says like Rava. It says kol hanechol b'shor hagadol b'shilka. Anytime you have a situation where something is edible, boiled with the shor hagadol, yochal b'gdi harach b'tzli, that's considered edible b'gdi harach when it's roasted. Umahin rashi kanafayim v'asachusim, like our Mishnah said, it tells you the ribs and the cartilage. V'gidin harachin, and also the soft sinews, nidonin kebasar. It says in this brisa that the soft sinews are considered to be also like meat. They're considered to be an edible portion of the Korban Pesach. Itmar, so now the Gemara has a machlokas amoraim. Gidin shasofan lahakshos. Let's say you have sinews that in the end, eventually, they're going to harden. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar nimnin alein bepesach. Rabbi Yochanan says that counts. You can be appointed on that area of the animal for Korban Pesach. It's edible. Reish Lakish Amar ein nimnin alein bepesach. Reish Lakish says it does not count. You can't be appointed over that for the Korban Pesach. Now Rashi over here explains gidim shasofan lahakshos gidei tzavor. So Rashi says we're talking here about the sinews of the neck. Now the sinews of the neck were discussed already in the previous Amatosis. Asked that it seems to be a bit of a contradiction, but in any case, Rashi over here says gidei tzavor uvigdiu tzlehin rachin. The point is, when it comes to a goat, when it comes to a sheep, they're soft. Avalim haya mazkin sofan lios kashim. In the end, if you would let the animal get a little older, these would become hard. So Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Rabbi Yochanan says, again, Rabbi Yochanan in this particular case says that's considered to be an edible portion of the Korban Pesach. And so Rashi says, v'gidin harachin dokatani b'hach brayson nidon kebasar. Now, what are we going to do we just quoted a brayso that said gidin harachin are considered basar. So Rabbi Yochanan mashmalei derachin hashta. Rabbi Yochanan will understand that they're soft right now, even though eventually they might get hard. It's good enough that they're soft now. Well, the Reish Lakish mashmalei b'shar gidin derachin liolam. Reish Lakish will have to learn that brayso talking about other gidim which are always soft, because as Reish Lakish says over here, again Reish Lakish says ein nimnin alein b'pesach. You're not allowed to be appointed because Reish Lakish holds the fact that it's eventually going to be hard makes it considered to be not edible. Rabbi Yochanan Amar nimnin alein basar hashta azlin. Rabbi Yochanan, who says that it counts for Korban Pesach because we follow what it is right now. Right now it's soft. Right now it's edible. Reish Lakish Amar ein nimnin alein. Reish Lakish says doesn't count basar besov azlin. We go by what it's going to be. It's going to harden. Eisvei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. So now Reish Lakish asks against Rabbi Yochanan. It said in our Mishnah, Kol hanechol b'shor hagadol yochel b'gdi harach u'mayin roshik nafayim v'asachusim. So hani in aval gidin shesofan lahakshos lo. It gives two examples over here, but apparently if you have gidin, which in the end will be hard, apparently that's not counted. That's not in the Mishnah as something that's considered edible. Amar lei, so Rabbi Yochanan says back, Tana hani v'hu adin lahanach. We have those in the list, but there are other ones. The list is not exhaustive. It would count this as well. Hani my time misachli v'shor hagadol b'shilka. Why is it that Rasha kanafayim v'asachusim? Why are those considered edible? Because in a shor hagadol you could boil it and it will be edible. Hanachnami misachli v'shor hagadol b'shilka. The same thing is true when it comes to these gidin, which are sofan lahakshos. If you would boil them in the shor hagadol, they would be edible. Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah le Rabbi Avin. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Avin, Ki ozlos lekami de Rabbi Avo. When you come in front of Rabbi Avo, Rami le, tell him the following contradiction. Miyamar Rabbi Yochanan gidin shesofan lahakshos nimnin alein bepesach. Is it really true that Rabbi Yochanan said that when it comes to gidin that in the end are going to become hard, that that's considered good, you can be appointed over them when it comes to Korban Pesach? Alma basar hashto azlinan. Sounds like Rabbi Yochanan says we follow what it is right now. But there was an incident where Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question: Or harosh shel egel harach mao sheyitma, talking about the issue of tumah. So they wanted to know the area of the hide of the head of the egel harach. This is a calf, which is very soft. So it's again, that's an area that is going to harden. Rashi over here says egel harach mefarish bor varotiv kozman sheyonek v'or rosh harach molgan oso v'necholimo. When it's still nursing, so the skin by the head of the animal is very soft. It's something that can be eaten together. So the question was, Ma'u sheyitma tumas ochlin. Do we say that that's considered food, that it becomes tamei, tumas ochlin? Basar hashta as lino metame. And the one end you could say right now it's edible, it's food, it should be tamei. Or basar basofa as lino veinu metame. Maybe we go by what's going to be, it's going to harden, and so then we say it's not going to be tamei. That was a question that Reish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, Ma'u sheyitma, is it tamei or not? V'yamar lo ein metame. He said it's not metame, meaning he said it's not considered to be food. Alma basar basofa as lino. That's a contradiction. Here Rabbi Yochanan seems to be saying we go by what's going to be, what it's going to be in the end. So Amar Lei, so he said back to him, the Ramalacha, the one who asked this question, Lochash Lekimche, isn't paying attention to what he's grinding. He's not paying attention to the wheat to see if it's good or not, because really, Hahadar Bey Rabbi Yochanan Lagabe de Reish Lakish. Really, Rabbi Yochanan changed his mind on this issue. V'Amar Lei said, Al Takniteni Shebaloshin Yachid, and Hishono, so Rabbi Yochanan said, don't bother me. It was learned Baloshin Yachid. Rashi over here explains. Hahadar Bey Rabbi Yochanan, Mehad Gidin Shesof and Lahakshos. The halacha that Rabbi Yochanan had said that we just quoted previously, Rabbi Yochanan argued with Reish Lakish and said by Gidin Shesof and Lahakshos we consider it to be edible, we consider it to be food, we go by what it is now. He actually changed his mind from that. Kidamar b'shili behema makasha upashtinon lamehador varot of the chipasha le Rabbi Yochanan Allah dayen metame v'yosei Reish Lakish mimasnisin dor varot of the katani elu shorosem kivasar or harosh alegal harach alma devasar hashta azlinan. Reish Lakish asked him this question from the Mishnah, and he said, "What are you talking about?" So v'yamar le Rabbi Yochanan al takni teni beosa Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan said back to him, don't bother me with that Mishnah. Shebeloshen Yachid Anishono. So I say that Mishnah, which implies Basar Hashta, actually supports what Rabbi Yochanan had originally said before he changed his mind. I think that was only a Yachid. That was not the opinion of the Rabbim. Alamei Kara have a samech Rabbi Yochanan. Really, originally, Rabbi Yochanan had relied on this Mishnah. Upalig begin shasof on lahakshos v'idkar diyachidahi v'hader bei. Then Rabbi Yochanan realized later that Mishnah was only a yechidah. It was only the opinion of an individual, and therefore he did not rely on it any longer. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah: Hashover es ha'etzem bepesach hatahar. Let's say somebody breaks a bone in a Karban Pesach that is a pure Karban Pesach, a kosher Karban Pesach. Hareza lo karboim, he gets malchus arboim. Again, we've said previously, there's a prohibition, ve'etzem lo sishperubo, you're not allowed to break the bones of a Karban Pesach. Aval hamoser betar, but if somebody leaves over a tar, a pure, a kosher Karban Pesach, it makes it nosar, v'hashover betame, or somebody breaks the bones of a Karban Pesach that is tameh, it became a pasul Karban Pesach, eino lokas harboim. In both of those cases, you don't get malchus. Rashi over here says, aval hamoser betar, afilo betar. It means if you leave over, even if you leave over nosar by a tar. Obviously, if it would be a bad Karban Pesach, it's not going to be malchus there either. V'hashover betame eino loka, somebody breaks the bones of a Karban Pesach that's tamei, also no malchus. Hamoser mishum loso siru, the leaving over, it says that there's a prohibition, there's a lav of don't leave over. As we're going to say, you don't get malchus for that prohibition. We'll see a couple reasons in the Gemara. Either it's a lav shein v'maiser, lav anitzah klasei, v'lo shover betame mishum lo sishberu v'taimim first b'Gemara. But in terms of breaking tamei, you're not going to violate v'yetzem lo sishberubo, and that also will be explained in the Gemara. Gemara says, B'shlama Moser B'tar Detanya. I understand why when you leave over in a pure Karban Pesach, why don't you get malchus? That's a brisa. It says, Lo sosiru mimenu arboker, v'anos mimenu arboker, bo akos v'litin aseh achar lo saseh. The pasuk gives us an aseh and tells you to burn the nosar. That's called a lav anitzah aseh. You fix the lav with the aseh. Lo mar she'ein loka. That tells you that there's no malchus. Instead of malchus, you just fix it by fulfilling the aseh. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yaakov says, Lo min hashem uzeh. That's not the reason. Elamisham dehave leilav shein bo maisa. The real reason is when you leave over, that's a negative prohibition, but you didn't do a maisa, you didn't do an action. You violate it passively. V'yein lokan olav. The rule is by lav shein bo maisa, you don't get malchus. Elashover b'tamim minolan. But the Gemara wants to know, where is the source that if you break a Karban Pesach, the bones of a Karban Pesach that's tameh, how do you know there you don't get malchus? The Amar Krokas, the pasuk says, v'yetzem lo sishberu bo. It says don't break a bone bo in it. bo bekosher v'lo bepasul. It applies by a kosher carbon pesach. It doesn't apply by a pasul carbon pesach. Ton Rabban, we learned in a brisa, v'yetzim lo sishbru bo bekosher v'lo bepasul. Same idea again. Only applies by a kosher carbon pesach, not by a pasul. Rebbe says, bebayis echad yeyachel v'etzim lo sishbru bo. Pasuk says you eat it together in one house and don't break the bone. Meaning, if you have a carbon pesach that is fit to be eaten, then there's a prohibition of breaking the bones. But if it's not fit to be eaten, there's no prohibition of breaking the bones. Now, Rebbe seems to be very similar to the Tanna Kama. Tanna Kama said, bekosher v'lo bepasul, it has to be a kosher carbon pesach. Rebbe says it has to be a carbon pesach that's roy la'achila. So the Gemara wants to know, what's the difference between these two opinions? Mai beinayu. What's the difference between Rebbe and the Tanna Kama? Amar Rebbe Yirmiyah says, Pesach haba betuma ika beinayu. What if you have a carbon pesach which the congregation was telling me they actually brought the carbon pesach betuma? That would be a machlokas between the two positions. Laman damar kosher, according to the one who says it only applies if the carbon pesach is kosher. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Pei Dalid Amud Beis.